Welcome back. By popular request, I'm going to cover the setup on my Viper 90. Now, this looks like a, typical stock Viper 90, except that I'm running a Spektrum 8360T, similar to how I ran the F-16. So it's a pretty normal bird, except for the fact that I've got Tailorons set up in it, which are used for landing primarily. So I've got mixing in here. When I throw switch F, really it doesn't matter what switch it is, it's just kind of arbitrary. But when I throw switch F and throw my flaps out, the ailerons move up just enough to provide some washout at the wingtips, which helps prevent the plane from stalling as much when it goes into a flare on landing. It also allows it to hold high alpha better, which is the mix that you've been seeing me use when I'm flying this jet and doing high alpha moves with it. This particular mix, I've tweaked a bit. Right now, I just go into curves and throw it up and hold it like this, and just hold it steady in the curve as I'm pulling around and doing a loop. And it slides around the loop as though it's a jet that has stabilators, like my F-15 or the F-16 over there. And it just does a remarkable job of staying put. Once you get it into this, you can actually throw it into just flaps, or probably even with just the wing like this. I haven't tested that, but I'm pretty sure that you can do it. But either way, you can just fly it around like this, and it works perfect. I can cover the mixing on how to do that, but it's really easy stuff. I mean, none of this is terribly complex. I'll show you the receiver, so those of you who aren't familiar with Spektrum can know what I'm talking about. But it's really nothing special or particularly unique. I also use a GPS receiver as well, the one that plugs into the X-Bus port on the 8360, so I can get callouts like I did in my last video. And a couple of the still, or the the clips that I actually didn't use, the jet was actually traveling into a headwind, and I had it flying like this at about 13 miles an hour. It was the lowest I recorded it. It's insane. I couldn't believe how well it was flying. For those wondering, generally speaking, I have the plane at about where it's supposed to be in the balance range. So it balances about right in here. With a 6,000 pack, it balances about right here. Not much of a difference between the two. The 6,000 is a little heavier, but I find the Vipers are pretty forgiving when it comes to center of gravity. I have never really seen too much oscillation that comes from flying it a little tail heavy, but I've never really seen much of a benefit to it. The increased pitch authority that you get from running a more neutral center of gravity causes the jet to stall much easier. And that's a common problem with Vipers, if anybody's ever had any experience with one, especially the ones that Horizon has FMS producing, like this one and the Viper 70. It has a very nasty stall, and oftentimes newer pilots or inexperienced pilots will confuse the stall of a Viper for a servo failure or some other type of electronic failure, when in reality what it really is just a highly loaded wing that does not tolerate flying too slowly. It has to maintain speed, and the more quickly, or the more quickly you're trying to bank, the more airspeed you have to keep. That's just one of the laws of flying when it comes to accelerated stalls. The more you bank, the more you have to keep the airspeed up. Your stall increases, or your stall speed increases as your bank angle increases. It's when you have the plane banked far enough, say you go from level like this to this, flying at 30 miles an hour can run the risk of a stall. If you are at 90 degrees and you don't have enough thrust, you're absolutely going to drop a wing and the plane is going to just spiral to the ground. I've seen it more than once. It happens with takeoffs, it happens on landing, it happens throughout the flight envelope of this jet. As they say, accelerated stalls can happen at any point. If you're not flying the plane and understanding its tendency to stall, you're in for a rough time. So let's get into the mixing. Let's demonstrate some of what this plane's actually capable of. I'm going to turn the volume down on my IX-12 so she doesn't keep talking over me. It's nothing magic. It's pretty simple stuff. The main mix that I'm going to demonstrate first is going to be a curve mix, and this is my flight control computer. It's what I've dubbed it. The FCS is actually a throttle to auxiliary 5, which I have assigned to this rocker switch in the back. And as you can see here, at low levels, so I'll keep the throttle cut on. At low levels, it doesn't really do much. At around the thrust that I use for landing, it has the most effect. And as we get up into the higher range of the throttle, it lowers down and it goes all the way down to being very ineffectual at the end. Now, there's a reason for this. It's a throttle to my gain channel for AS3X. So let's go into forward programming and I'll demonstrate exactly what this is doing. So this is something that I use on all my jets, the F-16, the F-15. It's a very powerful tool in your arsenal to allow the plane to fly at different airspeeds without oscillating or rocking. So if we go to the AS3X gains inside of forward programming, you'll see that I have it set to 90, 80, and 70. So roll is 90, pitch is 80%, and yaw is 70%. I could probably go even higher than that, because if you look at capture gyro gains, you'll see that as my throttle increases, so does my roll, pitch, and yaw gain, up until I start getting further up into the stick, about halfway. And then as I get all the way up, it reduces severely. I could really have it turn off completely at higher speeds, but I don't really need to. Now I'll show you what this actually looks like in action. So I need to back out of the forward programming menu, throttle up real quick. Okay, so you'll see this in action. If I was to slide the AS3X slider on my little rocker switch back here all the way to full so you can see it pronounced on the video. So it's at full effect right now, even at low rates, or not low rates, but rather low throttle. Okay, so this is not actually what it really is going to do. It's just for the video's sake, you can actually see it. So here we are with about landing thrust right here. So you can kind of see it has more of an effect. And then if we go to full thrust, has a lot less of an effect. Now if I put this into where it would normally fly, let's start with, so it's at the center of the slider at this point. So it's where I normally fly it, and the throttle channel is being mixed to the gain. This is what it's like with zero throttle. Here we are with the roll and pitch and yaw set to kind of what I would call a landing value. And then at full thrust, has very little effect. So at higher speeds, it causes it to not oscillate. It's something I kind of came up with earlier this year, and I've used it in every one of my jets since. And if I ever need more gain, I can always roll the slider to push it a little higher, or I can completely disable it just by sliding it over to the left. It's really quite powerful. It makes the jets fly better in different wind conditions. It makes it so it's more predictable on landing. It keeps it from oscillating as much throughout the flight envelope. The only problem is that if you're in landing thrust, which is what I use about right here, it does cause the plane to oscillate if it's going too fast and you throttle back and stay in that range. Say you were just going 100 miles an hour and then you put it into that range of throttle, it's going to start oscillating pretty crazy. Unfortunately, with Spektrum, there's no way that I know of right now to tie the GPS ground speed reading into the gains of the stabilization system. And I really wouldn't want to do that anyway, because airspeed isn't ground speed. So if I was going zero ground speed because the plane was sitting still in the air, say there's 100 miles an hour of wind or something and the plane's just sitting put, I would want more stabilization in that situation. I wouldn't want less, just because I would want it to actually stabilize for wind and any turbulence that's coming off of trees or whatnot. So it's kind of an imperfect system, but it works really well. And I've had hundreds of flights where I've come in perfectly fine every single time. So that's that flight control computer mix. It's kind of a poor name for it because it's not really an FCS, but in RC, that's about as good as it's going to get on Spektrum, I think. So we got on the mixing. You can see my first mix is elevator to AX2. Now because the IX12 has a quirk in the receiver programming, AX2 is not actually what I think it is. I think it's actually the flap. Yeah, so that's for the flap. So you can see how the curve... Actually, that's not for the flap. What is that? You know, honestly, I don't know. Wait, switch B. Yeah, it is for the flap. Okay. Probably should smooth that out, but I never actually push forward on the stick, so they're not going to retract into the sockets any more than they already are. Silly me. So elevator to the left aileron. This is what I use for the Pro mix that I'm using. So currently the mix is deflecting at 0.1 to 100%, which is 150% because I use 150% rates. And then at 0.2, halfway through the stick value, it's at 50%, and at 3, it's 0. And if I push down on the stick in this mode, which I never do, it just kind of bows outward because I'm using an expo mix to get it to be kind of like on a curve rather than on a linear point. So that's really all there is to that. If you can see it a little bit more clearly, this is the magic that makes high alpha possible in this particular jet. If you want an idea of how much deflection I'm actually getting, I'll go ahead and hook up the deflection meter. That would probably help out. Just because I fly my planes in a very particular way, I don't know if the percentage callouts are actually going to be as useful to you as seeing how much it's actually moving on the jet. So if we were to make a wager here and take a look at this, I'm going to say it's probably about 25 millimeters up. No, it's actually going up 30 millimeters, so that's pretty close. 30 millimeters up for the Crow. And for the flaps, they're moving out at... Let's see here, moving out at... It's actually getting caught on it. Let's move that back a little bit more. Flaps are moving out at 40, roughly 40 millimeters down. So 30 up on the ailerons and 40 down. And as long as you're pulling full back on the stick with 150% rates, with the outermost servo arm, with a brand new servo arm, I actually replaced these to get even more throw, and the innermost hole on the elevator so that you get the most deflection you can get out of it. You should be able to point this jet up at least 60 degrees vertical to get what I would start calling ultra alpha territory. High alpha to me is like a 20 to 40 sustained, 20 to 45. Anything beyond that I would call ultra alpha. So that's the mixing on the high G, or sorry, the high alpha, ultra alpha style of things, side of things rather. That pretty much handles most of the stuff that I use in this jet. I've got a couple of other mixes that I use too, but for example, like I had to mix switch C to left elevator to get it to actually perform reverse thrust, because left elevator in the mixing menu does not actually correspond to this elevator right here. It corresponds to the reverse thrust channel, which is ridiculous, and I wish Horizon would fix this problem already. I also have it set up on switch C to throttle so that it automatically just goes full reverse. But I find that it's kind of useless on pavement because the EDF has so much torque at full reverse that it causes the plane to pull hard left. Even full right rudder cannot counteract it. It will continually try to pull itself off of the road. It is insane. There's a very powerful motor in this particular plane. When I've got my flaps deployed, again, I maintain my roll stability by having the elevators functioning as ailerons. This is very important for me because when something's in crow, you tend to get that issue where you get adverse yaw from one of the surfaces not being deployed fully or even flat like this, it would tend to cause the plane to point towards the right as I'm trying to go left. So I'm trying to roll left, but it would start pointing right. Haven't noticed that too much with this jet, thankfully. But I know I've seen it in like the 90mm F-18 when full span flaps are deployed, and you have, even with ailerons enabled, the plane, you try to roll to the left, but it points to the right. And I've had it fly right at my face before when I try to roll out like that. It's not the most comfortable sensation in the world to see a very fast EDF with a very pointy end flying right towards your face. So in my F-16 video, I mentioned that if you are going to emulate what I'm doing, it might be best for you to experiment with it and see if adverse yaw is a real issue for you that you might want to address. And if that's the case and you have enough mixes left open, because I use pretty much all of mine, what you could do is go in there and just set it so the ailerons don't move when you have the flaps deployed, and all of your roll would come from the ailerons. The problem with that, though, is the ailerons are inboard, and because they're inboard, they don't have as much leverage in moving the plane on the roll axis. So you would have to give up a lot of roll stability to do that. And also, if they're not moving, that might negatively impact AS3X. I know that the radio probably doesn't care and won't see the mix, but it would still cause issues with it. In my opinion. I can't guarantee it. I may just be talking out of my ass. That's my opinion on it. If I'm wrong, feel free to tell me why. I always like to learn new things. That all being said, this is a pretty basic setup for an 8-channel. It's really not much more to it than this. I didn't really actually have to do very much work to get this to be an 8-channel setup either. Getting the ailerons enabled was really easy because all you had to do was just undo the elevator Y cable right here and then just pull in the cable from one of the cables from the front, pull another cable in, attach both of them, and you're good to go. If I had that easy of an experience as I could have had, let me rephrase, if I would have had that experience with the F-15 that I just did with ailerons last night, I would have been a lot happier about it. It took me 2 hours to get it done with that, and I had to cut some wires to make it work. That jet did not want ailerons, but it still got them. So again, there's plenty of space in here for the battery. There's plenty of space in here to change things up and move things around. The lights on this plane actually don't blink stock. They're solid red and solid white on the bottom. I don't even know why that is. The anti-collision beacon should be red on the bottom and it should be white on the top. But that's how FMS did this. I have no idea why. On mine, I have the blinking actually comes from the Freewing blue box that I picked up. You can kind of see it mounted underneath the receiver tray. That pretty much does does all of the blinking. The only problem is because the Avian ESC does not kick out 5 volts, you cannot get the blue box to work with a landing light that you would attach to the nose wheel, for example. So if you wanted a third landing light, which I did for a while, it wouldn't work because I've tried it. I couldn't figure out what the difference was until somebody on, I think it was RC Groups, mentioned that the blue box needs 5 volts of input for it to function correctly for switching light functions like that. It just will not accept the, I think it's 7.4 volts that it kicks out pretty much standard on the 100 amp model, or sorry, the 130 amp that this one's using. So that's really all there is to it. So if you did use the blue box and you want it more than just blinky lights, say you want the landing lights, you're probably not going to get it using that. I think you could absolutely get it using the Freewing light controller, but that's about all you could do with it. You wouldn't be able to use the blue box for that. And the light controller has an issue where the lights stay kind of lit and they blink at half the intensity of this. So it was either get an extra landing light or have lights that are just as bright as they are now, but they blink. So I chose to go with the bright blinky lights because they really show up in the evening. It looks like a real jet in the sky. I think that covers just about everything. Again, word to the wise for those of you guys, this plane does suffer once again from accelerated stalls. If you ever see this plane drop a wing, 99% chance that you stalled it. I've had this plane stall in any condition possible. You pull too hard, it'll stall. You You bank too much, it's going to stall. You just have to be very cognizant of the airspeed it's flying at, and having some thrust in your turns is going to save this jet. I've seen multiple examples, especially on YouTube, where somebody's flown this jet too slow. It comes in, it doesn't like what they're doing, it drops a wing, and it's just all over. If you're only, if you're this high off the ground, by the time the wing is done dropping, the plane just descends and goes vertical right into the ground. It happens so fast that most people do think that it's an issue related to the electronics, but it's really nothing more than aerodynamics. It is nothing more than a stall. And this plane weighs a lot for the wing area on this jet. I'm surprised more people aren't talking about the stall. So just, be cognizant of that. It can fly post-stall, absolutely. If you've seen my latest upload on the Viper, you can see me flying this thing like this, going around at 18 to 25 miles an hour. It is basically hovering on the EDF. The duct is basically holding this thing up. But it can only do that with the Crow Mix that I mentioned. So I'll put the files up for you guys to inspect and play around with. Hopefully this gives you some ideas. And I really want to see some other people doing this. So if you're feeling it, I'll give you some quick advice based on my testing. Try to go into as you're coming into the loop, start about 20 to 30 feet up, give it a nice bit of vertical, and then just pull hard with that Crow Mix through the entire loop. So just hold it like this and give it full throttle all the way through. And then as it gets into high alpha, as it gets into that point where the nose is starting to point upward, let's illustrate. When it starts doing this, you should be good, and you can let off the throttle a little bit, and it becomes a game of throttle management after that. I managed to get this thing into high alpha for at least 40 seconds. I think on a cooler day, like what we're getting here in North Carolina, I don't know if you can actually hear it, but my window's open, and there's a big windstorm outside from the cold front that just came through today. Tomorrow it should be cool enough that I might be able to run this thing on a full flight and high alpha. If I was feeling ballsy enough, I might be able to do it. I might be able to get a full 2 minutes of high alpha flight out of this thing and then still get it down on the ground safely. So again, hope this guy helps you out. If you got any questions, drop them in the comments for me. I'm always open to learning new things, and I'm always trying to help people push the limits. Ultimately, this hobby for me it's relaxing, but I think of myself as kind of a test pilot. I like to push the limits of what these airframes are capable of. And then once I've reached that limit, I want to see how much further they can actually go, because anybody can fly in circles, anybody can do aerobatics, but getting these planes to do things that they just weren't designed to do and then have them stay intact and be awesome in the end is totally worth it. And it's a lot of fun. And you learn a lot of new things about aerodynamics along the way. But yeah, I hope this helps you guys out. Have a good one.